Hey guys, this is Oakley and we're going to be doing a 3 versus 4 battle. So this is after the recommendation that you guys had that we play the Battle of Gaugamela. So this is what we're going to be having here. Actually, the forces arrayed are going to be 3 of us playing as Macedon. So we're going to be lined up here. And the opponents are going to be a mix of Parthia and Pontus. Pontus is there in order to allow them to use chariots. So we had a lot of restrictions on this game, mostly because we did want it to be semi-historically accurate. So our forces, the way they're arranged here are, I tried to direct this, so the main phalanx and hoplites are going to be in the center, and we're going to have a strong body. Mercenaries and additional hoplites are going to be in the back. So historically Alexander did have a second line here, and then on the flanks is where he's going to mass most of his forces. So Parmenion would have been leading the left flank, and then over here Alexander would have been stationed with his own troops. What I have even done is with these companions, I've stuck some of our own spear units here. Alexander did make use of incorporating infantry with his cavalry, running alongside them like this so that the cavalry could fight with the backing of stationary troops like that. It really helped for the mobility and the ability for his troops to really hit home and attack and fall back and be reinforced by these hoplites. In any case, the opponents are going to be lined up here on this battle. Very cinematic. I love this battlefield. The opponents are going to be arrayed with a massive front in the center. Let's go ahead and put this on slow motion. So they're going to have chariots on this flank, many archers, more of these troops here. Now historically Darius would have been positioned in the center. He would have had Greek hoplites around him. He would have had masses of infantry, skirmishers up front, chariots here, and the 10,000 immortals would have been stationed around Darius, and the line would have outstretched the Macedonian line. So you're kind of seeing that here. Overall, the engagement is going pretty well. We are drawing the enemy cavalry off to this flank as Alexander did historically. So the battle occurred on the plains of Gaugamela. It was not the first encounter between the Persians and Alexander, but when it was, Darius was ready for Alexander. He had amassed a huge army. Scholars think that the true numbers given to Darius are probably something around 70,000, and that's mostly based off supply trains and what he could have mustered at the time, whereas Alexander was probably mustering something around 35,000 troops. So that's going to vary widely, however. So take every measure with a grain of salt. If you were to go by the ancient historians, they would say that you're dealing with something in the hundreds of thousands of troops, but that's pretty unlikely. In any case, we're going to be having an exchange of missiles in the center. So the battle itself would have commenced mostly with these types of engagements here in the front, skirmishers exchanging fire, and actually the ground in front of the armies here would have been hand-groomed by Darius and the Persians. They cleared it of major obstacles, bushes, small trees, and collections of rocks, and they even grooved and tailored it in some areas in order to allow chariots to be maximum in their efficiency. So here we can see the chariots, for example, beginning to move forward for their charge. They're going to be moving forward. So the battle in reality took place in several stages. So the Macedonians formed a large flank. As I said, Parmenion was here. Alexander's goal was to move up with his pike wall here, keep it unified, and then these reserves would have actually stayed in the back, and they would have been forced to react to moves on either flank. Alexander knew that he was just so outnumbered that he couldn't possibly keep his troops from being flanked, so these troops were supposed to be held in reserve. Meanwhile, Alexander led his troops on the far right, pulling the Persians to mirror him further and further to the right. A massive cavalry engagement took place on the right side, and you'll be seeing some of that in this battle. So the engagement took here, and then Alexander doubled back and struck right at Darius. Anyways, what's going on in the center is I am trying to help out with this center charge here. Our skirmishers pushed forward, and I moved in with some of these companions just to force the enemy troops back. Massive damage is being dealt here by the chariots, just cleaning up our forces, so this is not a good use of it. At this point, we're yelling into our team speak to pull everything back to the massive pike wall that we have formed up here. So these guys are going to be positioning themselves ready to face any of the forces coming up. So here we go, going to be forming up. I'm going to charge into these chariots with my own cavalry, try and pin them down and slow them in order to be able to do damage with our pike wall. But you can, take a look at this, the pike wall all along here facing the Persians. There's not much they can do in the face of this. So we're going to be trying to reform. I'm pulling back to form a more coherent flank, and over here the reinforcements have been pulled over in order to face this flank attack. So we're holding forces here. At this point we're going to double back, however, and just as Alexander did, we're going to try and push through this gap that was formed now that we split these enemy forces. Sorry if this is on slow motion, but a lot of stuff is going on. We'll go back into normal speed quite soon. So this flank is being picked apart by some of these skirmishers. However, it is hitting these troops as opposed to our more important, core of pikes here. And now we can take a look at the main line here. Our cavalry retreating back behind this line, and we are ready to anticipate the charge of the enemy forces. Tons and tons of sarissas here. So as Alexander moved forward with his forces on the extreme Macedonian right, this flank would have had to hold its own against a combined army that was in itself flanking around this position at all times. Parmenian's flank here would, at the end of the day, be almost completely surrounded. A gap even formed right here on the battlefield. Persians streamed through it. Some of them went and attacked Parmenian, however, most of them continued on through the battlefield and went to attack Alexander's baggage train, hoping to get back some of the prisoners of war, including the queen, I believe. So in any case, here is going to commence the main engagement of the lines. You can see all these forces moving forward, and the cavalry here that I pulled back are now going to be charging forward, engaging. This is going to be a pretty large cavalry engagement over on this flank, and now they're moving forward towards our large line of spears. Let's go ahead and put this on play, and let's go ahead and just move all the way up through here. So the charge is coming on all flanks, the infantry moving up, and we're basically just going to present a massive line of spears. Many of these troops are going to have a hard time pushing through. However, the additional arrows and skirmishers and all that fire is going to do a lot of damage to us. We are now also having chariots moving into the fight, so straight into the thick of it here. Not going to be doing the most effective damage. However, they are able to crush through and weaken part of this flank straight into the spears. It was too thin in order to stop them, but the reinforcements we do have in the back, slingers and such, are doing tons and tons of damage. We even did manage to get some of these Macedonians here, so I'm going to go ahead and put this on slow. What I was able to do at this point is we pulled the cavalry so far out here that I slipped two of these cavalry here. I was pulling a move much like Alexander and pushed the companion cav led by the king himself up through here, so we're going to be charging straight into the center. So if this were more historical, you would have had more and more troops here, and Darius probably would have been centered here. He could see all the forces he sent forward, and looking out in front of him would have been these mass troops coming towards him, the companion, and they would have been reinforced by these pike troops, would have been pushing forward, all of this pushing in the center. On the left would have been the big wheeling cavalry engagement, and we can go ahead and take a look at the formations here, put it back on pause, or play, excuse me, and just see what's going on here. So they're making really no headway. So historically speaking, when the enemy forces, the Persian troops, would have been fighting the Macedonian pikes, they would have had an easier time of infiltrating the pikes. Now, of course, dense formations like this would have been very effective, but it would have been more customary for the Persians to be reinforced by archers, javelin men, all sorts of chariots that would have broken the partial formation of the pikes. However, the Macedonians were able to present a pretty formidable front. But just due to the sheer outnumbering that they were facing, there was a lot of problems on this day of battle. We can go ahead and look up on the top perspective. So this is kind of matching history. A large engagement on this flank. Macedonian cavalry has pushed through here and is charging through the center. However, this flank is being outnumbered and pushed around the side. The center is holding. Historically, the center would have pushed up and reinforced through here, broken through right there. Now, if we go back on this flank, this is where Parmenian, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, would have been stationed. They would have been thin. They would have been actually formed up in a curve at this point in order to try and push back the Persians, who were at this point flanking around the sides. And what's going to happen right here is at our thinnest point of the lines is where we're going to have a breaking in the formation. The enemy is going to be pushing up at this point with their own pikes. So at the Battle of Gaugamela itself, there would have been some pikes, I believe, on the Persian side. Mostly they would have been drawn up from Eastern forces, so not really Hellenic troops, but actually they were using some Greek mercenaries. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Persians were fielding some of their own pikes. However, mostly they would have been using vast numbers of cavalry, and they even had some elephants, although they didn't really partake in the battle. And now the massive front of the pikes facing the pikes These guys seem to be outdoing our own pikes, who have not lowered themselves in time. They're pushed very thin in this segment right here, and this is where they're actually going to be cracking. So the Macedonian line is going to have its breaking point right through here, which is going to be actually fairly historic. And these lines are drawn very thin, so once the archers are going to start turning on them, they're going to be able to tear them a new one. Or on this flank, we have had the chariots push in on our men and just crush through our forces. And so they're going to be running amok. So I'm trying to move more men, but you can see this is what happened historically. Tons and tons of the troops would have been fighting on this side. Scythians against Macedonians, Boeotians, and all sorts of other forces here. Now Alexander would have had his companions formed up in squadrons. The cavalry engagement would have been a lot of circling, attacking, circling, attacking. Much like this, where you have troops falling back, attacking, attacking. So Alexander had his own reserves amongst the cavalry, but all the while this was the most hotly contested part of the battlefield. Tons and tons of Macedonians were engaged here, the cream of the crop. Now a gap would have opened up, which I exploited earlier, and that's where Alexander charged. Now we're going to be breaking through this section of the battlefield, and now we're going to be pushing forward. So the pike wall here is going to be pushing up. However, there are still many of these remaining troops on the Persian side, and they're going to be pushing up over here. They're going to be trying to crush our Macedonians who are running amok, so that's probably a good move. Try and get rid of our heavy troops here, decrease our mobility, and this long group of archers and various other skirmishers here are going to be facing against our pikes, who are now slowly moving forward. They're ready for battle with the sun behind them. Very, very cool. So this is a bit how it would have happened historically. You would have had various troops marching up in rank. These gaps probably wouldn't have existed, but this sort of stepped formation, that's how the pikes would have formed. And Alexander actually liked having his pikes always remain mobile. He wanted them to be in utmost, tip-top shape, and they would have actually marched towards the enemy in battle. And seeing that actually did a huge blow to the enemy morale, and the fact that even though facing larger numbers, Alexander was not afraid to charge forward. So this flank is going to be a big engagement. Here we've decided to just charge forward, engage with this mass of troops. Meanwhile, the chariots are going to be coming right into these forces here. Again, not the best decision, but they're going to be causing chaos amongst our ranks. Now, in reality, the chariots would have had a little bit of an easier time against most armies, but what Alexander did is he was very, very clever. So let me put this on slow so we don't miss anything. When the chariots charged forward, Alexander had a lot of peltas, archers, and some slingers, and they would have taken out a good number of the chariots. The chariots that did get through were actually charging straight towards the Macedonian line. However, what Alexander had trained his troops to do was just merely step aside, create channels in the Macedonian lines. Chariots would have funneled through there, and then once inside, they would have been attacked from all sides with various peltas units and all sorts of other units supporting in the back lines. And that would have killed the remaining troops. Anyways, the way the battle has developed here is the front lines were able to hold. Here Hephaestion was able to hold on his own, and now we're going to be starting to turn the tide of the battle. The center did collapse just as we had said it did historically, and the sheer number of bodies in this is just incredible. Our Macedonian cav is still in here, definitely doing a lot of damage. They're going to be the ones racking up most of the kills. Now on this flank is where it's going to come down to the last stand of the Persians. They have still not fought, so this is going to be a very, very formidable assault. And you can see these guys were fighting since the very start of the battle, and they're still holding in, cycle charging in and out, in and out. Now over here, the infantry of the Persians is going to be holding up against these hoplite troops, so that's going to be good enough for them to hold for the time being, and it's going to allow all these skirmishers actually to do a significant amount of damage to our troops, who are now going to be moving up. And Pontus does still have some of the noble blood calves, so they're going to be going to try and reinforce, peel some of our troops off. Now when these guys do reform, they're going to be doing a lot of damage against our troops, especially for example over here where the archers are just stationed and they can hit the troops on our flanks. This is preferably what Darius would have wanted to do in this engagement. However, the Macedonians moved up so quickly that the archers were not able to be super effective, and Alexander just charged in through the center after pushing on the flank. Had the Persians just stood at a distance and fired their arrows, it would have actually caused logistical issues because Alexander was in fact moving forward. Had he reached the archers, he would have basically started killing them, and the archers would have had to fall back. It would have been very disorganized. They would have had a hard time falling back through their own troops. It would have caused more and more panic. And so what happened in this case was the archers were not able to, deploy in the front lines, do a lot of damage, and then pull back because Alexander was constantly pushing forward. Now what you're going to see here is something that you have to watch out for. So if this had happened earlier in the battle, if, for example, our enemies had been able to concentrate fire on our own Macedonian troops, it's going to do tons and tons of damage on individual units. So if I were to command the opponent's forces, what I would have done is mass skirmishers on one section of our line, cracked it open, just like you're seeing here with these pikes, just destroy units and then charge in, fill in the gaps, and then with the cavalry engage with ours on the flank, but really try and punch a hole with these various missiles. And you can see really it does tremendous amounts of damage. Now if we're talking something that's not really represented in Total War, but you can see the incoming volleys of the spears, javelins, and arrows. The advantage of having sarissas up in the air actually is that they would have deflected projectiles coming in. You can imagine a mass of these with troops maybe like, 50 or so deep. An arrow fired through here is really going to have a hard time passing through. You can see just how overlapping they are, and that would have really decreased the effectiveness of the missiles as well. The opponents are, however, going to get a nice charge on the rear of our troops. The bannerman goes down, and this is going to be really a pretty big turning point on this side of the battle. They have cleaned up our cav here. Alexander's finest have gone down, and the front is being held. Meanwhile, all these javelin troops are going to be picking off my core troops here, the levy pikemen who are still alive. However, they're going to be pushing forward. I'm going to have to take them off of phalanx mode so they can chase after these more mobile troops. Let's go ahead and put this on play and just watch how quickly these troops go down. Total pincushions in this case. So once they get down to a critical amount where they just can't defend themselves, yeah, that's absurd. Guys writhing on the ground. These skirmishers doing so much damage. So you can imagine if this had happened, in real life, they would have been able to punch through some part of the line. And effectively, that probably did happen at some points of the battlefield at Gaugamela. Probably on the Hephaestion side where it was hardest fought. But we're losing tons of guys, so I'm going to tell my troops to charge forward just because they're losing so many men. An entire unit right there wiped out. Some of them ditched their spears, but yeah, they're just going to be completely taken out. The next line is going to move forward, but they're similarly going to be dealing with tons of incoming fire. Now charging forward, and we're finally going to get these guys to run off, and that's going to isolate them. Over here, our troops are being killed. The rear charge from these cavalry now eliminated, our Macedonians. They're going to be coming back, pinching our guys between the remaining Persian troops. These guys are very heavy. They're going to be doing a lot of damage to us. Additionally, the archers here doing all that they can. However, in the back, it's really going to be the reforming Macedonians who are going to come back and seize the day. So very much like how Alexander broke through and cracked the Persians in the center, he had a chance actually, in fact, of chasing Darius and trying to kill him. However, hearing messages from his left flank under Parmenion that they were completely surrounded and about to crack, Alexander made the tough decision of turning around and supporting his troops. But yeah, you can see once our troops are dispersed and out in the open, cavalry tear them apart, missiles tear them apart. So that's what Darius was hoping to do, was to draw Alexander out, beat him on his own terms. But Alexander had his own plans, and the battlefield actually itself, part of it, Alexander anchored his line. There would have been a river running on this side, and that's sort of how he was able to keep from being heavily outflanked. Anyways, let's go ahead and watch some of the combat unfolding here. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope I'm not talking too much, and I hope you can enjoy some of the history. This was definitely a very fun battle. We had to provide a lot of rules and guidance to our players, and in particular, we didn't really know how to make it fair and balanced, considering it was 4 against 3. So some of the rules were the opponents were not allowed to bring too many heavy infantry. So don't take it that they were bad at this battle. We kind of forced them to have these terrible troops, but I think it does make for a very cinematic fight when you have tons and tons of these low-grade troops fighting against the crack Macedonians. In any case, thanks so much for all of you who participated. Let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. So right here, you can see the 4 opponents we were facing ourselves, definitely getting a lot of kills with the foot companions. The companion cav striking through to the heart of the enemy. Same goes for Paris here. Lots of kills here. The Peltas doing lots of damage. And yep, once again, the companion and Thessalian cavalry doing tons and tons of damage. Slingers killing it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the enemy. So their cavalry did actually hold their own. These were the javelin men taking a lot of the, or doing a lot of damage to me at the end, you saw right there. So they were very effective. However, this entire army basically broke, like, yeah, it shattered. Really, we should have allowed our allies to get more, Pontic swordsmen and troops that could actually hold up with more armor, because these guys really cracked. But, a lot of Darius's forces were, in fact, unarmed and not really equipped to deal with a massive line of pikes, so we were hoping to represent some of that. Anyways, the chariots actually, look at this, they did pretty well, even though most of them did end up kind of charging right into pikes. 172, 193, 41, so they did their own. However, it really came down to these, hillmen and basic troops that really just couldn't stack up to our own troops. Again, chariots doing alright, and yep, Pontic swordsmen were getting the massive amounts of kills, and the bronze shield pikemen, who probably historically would have been mercenaries that the Darius employed, they would have been Greeks for the, up to be employed by whoever, and they actually stacked up pretty well. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll try and maybe do another one of these Battle of Gaugamela reenactments another time, try and change it up, maybe allow the opponents to have better troops, and maybe I'll switch sides and be Darius for once. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and yeah, see you next time.